Good afternoon. My name is Steve Wyatt, and I just, like you mentioned before, will do my best to keep us from not getting on schedule, but to stay ahead of schedule, okay? Anyway, I'm looking forward to discussing the 4 pillars of research and teaching and outreach and economic development of today's universities. You know, the record of the role played by public research universities, and especially land-grant universities, in the history of economic development of the United States is really quite clear and convincing. In 1862, after multiple tries, Congress passed the Morrill Act, and President Lincoln signed that into law. That act created federal lands to each state to fund the establishment of at least one college in the state. These colleges would teach a wide variety of subjects with the purpose of, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in several pursuits and professions of life. Private universities already existed, but many of those were inaccessible to all but the wealthier citizens, and the Morrill envisioned an educational system for a broader population. These schools that were born out of the Civil War prepared generations of students who created and drove the American century. With that, we have prosperity and growth of the middle class. And as a result, over the time, the mission of these schools came to rest on those 3 pillars that we know today of teaching, research, and outreach. Today, many of these schools have gone on to add economic development as a 4th mission of their university. They've done so in recognition of the new role that has been called upon us to play in driving innovation, entrepreneurship, and broader economic opportunity. And this is a significant challenge, I think, for all of our institutions, especially at a time when the broader economic, when our states are providing us with fewer and fewer resources when you look at it per full-time equivalent student. So the question now is, are we ready to commit, to reflect on our mission from the past, to be able to take this strategy in a more serious way, given the current situation that we find ourselves? So I'd like for you to think about a couple of questions as we move forward. There we go. Sorry about that. One of the challenges of this, and when you're colorblind to green and red, it makes it a little bit interesting on the buttons. But anyway, so who's creating the wealth to drive economic growth? Just a couple of questions for you to think about. And where will innovation come from today? And where are the innovators and the entrepreneurs? And what is our role? And how can we help? A lot of times when we think about that, we're kind of surprised about how much things have changed over the last 60 years. If you look at this next slide and you go all the way back to the mid-50s and you look at the great companies that provided the jobs and so forth, these were the companies, GM, US Steel, GE, Chrysler, Standard Oil. If you look at them today, 60 years later, you find that those companies have changed. You also find that many of those were focused on a lot of production, and today you find more and more of those being more service and retail types of operations. And when I looked at our state, the situation was pretty similar. And my guess is if you would look at a lot of your states, you would find some of the most similar situations as well. So one of the reasons that I think that we find fewer and fewer types of companies that are producing products, even though we see kind of a resurgence of manufacturing, is that a lot of the basic research has departed from us. And so, anyone know what that is a picture of? Who? I heard it over here. The transistor, right. That came out of Bell Labs, early research and so forth. But where have they gone? Well, most of them have gone far and far away because there's not nearly the focus in a lot of companies on the research side, and we don't see quite as many of the types of innovations. When we begin to think about that, growing up in the Midwest on a farm, you know, one of the key things is you wanted to make sure you had enough seed corn. And so, especially if you go back in time when you had to keep your own corn, that was very important. And through the winter, you couldn't eat your seed corn, or you'd have nothing to plant in the fall. If we're not careful as we look at the innovation and the importance of research, we may not have the seeds planted for the future that we're going to need for innovation. And so I think it's an important step for us to keep in mind. Most of you have looked at a lot about the innovation gap and deficit, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I think it's important to realize where we're at. If you look at where basic research is, you'll notice that we're not growing at the rate that we used to. You also notice that if anything, we're maybe level, and that wouldn't be so bad unless you look at your neighbors. Because when you look at your neighbors and you begin to look at the other countries around the globe, you'll notice that as a percentage of GDP, the U.S. isn't contributing as much. And you see a lot of other countries that are. And so what is that going to be in the future? Where's the seed corn going to come from? If you look at how the U.S. as a percentage of GDP has dropped, it's also significant. So, I think one of the unique opportunities for universities is many of them focusing a lot more on economic development and being able to show the economic impact that is resulting from the research that we're doing. We're also being held at even greater and greater levels of accountability. We see STAR metrics. We also see U metrics that's being focused, and also a larger group of collaboration on IRIS being able to articulate. I think the reality is this: the times are changing. What I mean by that is the expectation is for us to provide the seed corn a lot more for the rest of society through innovations and inventions for the future. So I think we're being called on to be the engines of innovation. And that is an opportunity for us to be able to once again be visibly seen as part of that economic power. Now the challenge I think that faces universities, and I think probably all of us struggle with, is how do we go about taking the innovations that are in our universities and getting them out? Many times our research may not necessarily be ready for prime time. It may need some additional work in order to get there. So it becomes critical upon us to build a lot of relationships with our communities in order to put all of those pieces together of a car, to put the wheels on it to make sure. And so we've kind of coined this phrase community university innovation and called it communovation. I'm not sure that's going to show up in Webster anytime soon, but it does give you the idea of the concept about the importance of pulling together players. So what does it really require? It requires building a lot of relationships, and it requires us to do some things that we have not historically done to the extent we have. It's in many ways an additional way in which we engage. One of those is we start looking at how you go about engaging. One of the areas where we're short is capital. Is there any university out there that has too much money? I don't see very many hands. So building relationships in order to come up with capital becomes very important. And figuring out how to build those networks, how to look for partners and strategic partners. And some of the things we've been looking at is hospital systems that have resources to invest. We've been looking at other high-wealth individuals that are alumni that are coming together to help provide some of those capital and so forth. Also, services. It takes a lot. You know, a lot of times people think that it's really easy to move these things out. You need expertise. You need all sorts of things that you have to reach out to the community. Management. Many of our faculty members need experienced entrepreneurs and mentors to come alongside. We also look at the federal agencies. That, you know, it's very important for them to continue to fund us in the sciences and also additional state funding, because those resources are important on the federal side and also to help deal with the valley of death, as it's referred to in a lot of economic development circles for new startup companies and entrepreneurs. And then, of course, as a university, we have the challenge of not only continuing to build that research and have the technical expertise, but how do we begin to build the types of pipelines where we can connect the dots? And that is harder, much harder to do than to say, because we have different cultures between the ways in which we operate in the academy and the ways in which the private sector. And trying to find ways in order to bridge those can be a real challenge. And one of the things that we're constantly looking at, we've been bringing individuals to come in, different organizations to help assess where we are in different areas of the university. Where are we at as far as the IP that we have? Where are we at as far as having the systems in place to be a friendly place, the ability to collaborate, and to help foster and support entrepreneurs becomes very important. But you know what? If you can put those pieces together, and I think we're all working very diligently in order to do that, it can scale. We've recently had some faculty members that, as we've been at the University of Missouri, been able to pull a lot of these resources together. We've been holding events where we're getting all of the support services together, helping them learn to coordinate better and for us to really come together. And that has led to some unique opportunities. We're now finding that within the last month, I had a group of, I believe it was 3 billionaires from China that was coming in to invest in some of our one of our faculty startups and companies, and this is the second time they've been back to invest more. And so when you put the pieces together, it can scale on a global level, and that included the entire community coming along to help support that startup company as well. So what I'd like to do in my last few minutes is just to give you a few of the things that's going on at the University of Missouri. We're really trying to build a strategy for research, and what we've developed is a 5-point plan. It's relatively simple, but there's a lot of work behind those. And I'll take a close look at each of those. So one of the first things that we're working very diligently on is focusing on working together. And that sounds so simplistic, but however, that's very important to get the different, we're a 4-system group. So we've got 3 other sister campuses, but getting them to work together, looking for opportunities in which we can collaborate and work better at working with the private sector and focusing on a lot of our entrepreneurial type activities. So we're looking about how to greater connect in ways at an even deeper level. To the west of us, we're located in the center of our state, is the Animal Health Corridor, which is the largest collection of animal health companies in the world. And through our university, we work very closely with them and our College of Veterinary Medicine, and are working with lots of different startup companies, and a lot of those accelerators out of there are coming to us to look for ways in order to connect, which is providing research opportunities and spin-outs of entrepreneurial companies. Onto the east is one of the larger collections of plant science group with, for example, the Danforth Plant Science Centers, and we're working closer with them with hiring 4 joint faculty appointments of high caliber, once again, building and working with the industries. We're also trying to pull together all of our resources. This is a lot of dots, but what it shows is through the university, we have extension, we have telehealth, we have all of these different sources, and trying to figure out how to keep everybody on the same page and moving in some of the same direction, looking at those resources and assets. Second thing that is critical and what this is about is really how do we end up growing our own entrepreneurs and innovators and building a community of entrepreneurs and keeping a few of them there to grow tomorrow's companies. This gentleman here is one of our faculty member out of our College of Agriculture who created an extrusion process to create chicken fibers out of a soy protein. If you're looking at Whole Foods or some of the other places, you'll find it's called Beyond Meat. It has the taste and texture of chicken. There's just no chicken in it. But it is it is an alternative that gives people who end up needing additional protein without the meat products, and also for vegans and so forth. So it's been very interesting, and just a couple of things about how you think about it. As you take your IP and license it out, in this particular plant, in the licensing agreement, we included an option that they had to put 1 plant in the state of Missouri as they moved forward. So it's kind of something you may want to consider as you're moving forward. We also looked at taking some equity. I think you're going to see more and more. Bill Gates has talked a lot about this, as well as it's on the market. They're also moving forward to beef crumplets. And guess what? It does taste like chicken, just in case you're wondering. Entrepreneurship is really important. If you look at the stats, and there's lots of them out there, the Midwest doesn't do probably as well as it could. You see where a lot of those locations are: California, Massachusetts, New York. It's a lot of places where there's lots of capital, and so capital becomes important. So if you're looking about pulling together entrepreneurs is important. We've all heard that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a huge city to raise an entrepreneur, because they take a lot of resources, a lot of capital, a lot of things that have to come together. So here's some of the examples very quickly, some of the things that we're doing. We have an entrepreneurial scholars program where students apply, and we're providing funding for about 12 of them. They've got an area which is not typically entrepreneurial. We'll pay for their up to 15 hours of a minor tacked onto that to get an entrepreneurial minor, plus a $4,000 stipend during the summer while they're working in a company. So that's one piece. We also have a student angel capital fund. They actually have money that was donated to them, and they actually invest in companies. They sister and work alongside our local Centennial Angel investors. We do numerous pitch competitions, which I assume a lot of you do as well. We've also do a lot of entrepreneurial training for faculty as well. We've been holding different training sessions for faculty on entrepreneurship where they can get a sampling of it, all the way up to 40 hours of training and practice with pitch competitions. A lot of our internal funding streams, we're also including pitch competitions for them. 4 parts of those for that purpose, that they need to practice learning how to pitch as well. All sorts of startup weekends, business counseling, and so forth. The other thing is being smart and shrewd with IP. Our students own their own IP. We've also moved to where if a company is paying for the research, they can own their own IP if it's okay with the faculty member. And we also are doing a lot where we're looking about taking equity, sometimes in exchange for them not having to reimburse paying for patent and IP expenses. So I could talk more about that as well. The other thing is we're really looking at working with those individuals that are willing, that want to move forward. And a lot of that boils down to being able to say yes. Out of our journalism school, there was an alumni came back, wanted to start a company named Newsy. It ended up being sold here recently for about $35 million. The university had a piece of equity in that one. But one of the challenges was they couldn't get enough bandwidth. So we ended up figuring out, how do we do that? Okay, we'll make them adjunct faculties and let these be classrooms so we could run the pipe across the street so that we could work, so that we could help them with their bandwidth. So, you got to think of things that you can do and ways in which we work together in trying to figure out how to say yes. The last one is don't be jealous. In academia, it's not very nice to copy without a lot of attribution. I also have a law degree, and that's what they teach you to do all the time, is go through and copy a lot of the forms and everything. So part of that is this. If somebody's doing a great job, work with them. So for example, our venture mentoring system is based off of MIT's venture mentoring system. They've done a great job. They got a great reputation. We're adapting it and bringing it home. And lastly, I just want to leave you with one real quick story. This is one of our companies that I'm really proud of because it's a poster child. So the gentleman there, his name is Luis Jimenez. He was the chair of the first entrepreneurial club called Climb. And then the lady to the right was also part of one of our bio-design program. And she worked with a faculty member, and they create this collagen-type program. He graduated with his MBA, went on to become the CEO of that particular company. It was also used as a capstone high-growth class. We also licensed the IP and took a piece of equity there. We then went ahead and put cash in. A couple of our colleges actually came up with some alumni donations and put cash in it, and the university put cash into it as well. Our local investors did. They're in clinical trials, and there's a really good announcement that's going to come before too much longer, but I can't tell you about that. But one of the key points of that is you got to put all the pieces together, and it really does require you to figure out how to say yes, how to figure out how to do things you've never done before. We hadn't taken equity, and we changed our collective rules in order to be able to do it, and it's making a big difference in opening up a lot of opportunities. Are there any questions? If not, I'll turn it over to my next presenter.